Hi, welcome to My Favorite Mistake. I'm your host, Mark Graben. Our guest today is John Willson. He is Executive Director of SOAR, which is the world's premier adventure program serving youth with both ADHD and learning disabilities. SOAR stands for Success Oriented Achievements Realized. So, SOAR's outdoor adventure based programs provide academic instruction, experiential education, and life skills development for youth and young adults from ages 8 to 25. So we'll have a chance to learn more about those programs and the effect they're having. But first off, John, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. People will see in the show notes, Willson is with two L's.
That's correct.
So I'm guessing one of the most common mistakes in your life is getting that misspelled, huh?
I do, and I'm fond to say that I'm no garden variety Wilson.
It's pronounced Wilson with two L's. I'm sure it just rolls
right off the tongue.
Rolls right off. So it goes to show we make an assumption about how someone's name is spelled. We could still be wrong, even with Wilson or variations on Smith. But at least John is straightforward, and I'm always afraid to mispronounce somebody's name, but I assume I got it right. John Willson.
That's me.
All right. So as we always do here, I mean, there's a lot of things we could chat about, but I would love to hear your story, John. What's your favorite mistake?
So I have had a chance to reflect on that question. It's a really interesting and brilliant question. And as I was reflecting on my favorite mistake, it led to a theme, a pattern of mistakes that I'll go into. But I'll give you the specific event. I was in Maine on an adventure trip, and I had decided to hike to the top of Katahdin. Mount Katahdin is the ending or starting point of the Appalachian Trail, depending on where you start. And there's two ways to get there. There's the classic, just walk up, and you're going up and over boulder fields, and then there's a access point called the ridgeline access. And I decided to take the ridgeline, and so I left early in the morning, and I'm moving towards, and by around lunchtime, I see the summit, and I'm really, excited. And I get to the summit, and it was a false summit. It was, and so then, and I look, and the real summit disappears into the clouds, it's a lot bigger than I had anticipated. And so I decide, okay, I'm going to go ahead and go for it. And so. So after that first fall summit, the climb became much more technical, and I'm going up down a ridge, up a ridge, and I'm on this knife's edge. It's actually called the knife's edge route. And I'm on this knife edge with, 1,000-foot drop on either side of me. And then the storm came in and socked in with weather, and I had no idea how far it really was up, but the question was, do I keep going, knowing that the walk down the other path is going to be much easier than what I just did? Or do I turn around now, knowing what I've just accomplished, and go down? Well, the more prudent choice, the non-mistake choice, would have been to go the way because you've already seen that. But I knew it was going to be treacherous. And so I went ahead and went on up and kept going. And I got to the top of Mount Katahdin, and I could see nothing. I was completely socked in. But the sense of accomplishment that I felt, the glorious moment that I had when I achieved that goal, and as it turned out, I was much closer to the summit, and the hike down ended up being a much softer, easy, gentler approach. So in hindsight, even though I made the wrong decision, I made a mistake, it ended up really working out to my advantage in so many ways. And as I reflect on that, it's kind of like getting happily lost. You are you're traveling and you take a wrong exit, and all of a sudden you're in this little town that you've never seen before. Um, and so you stop to have lunch at a little diner, and
Hmm.
you have the best chicken fried steak you've ever had in your life. That wouldn't have happened if you hadn't made that mistake and gotten lost.
Hmm.
And so it's the opportunities that come from the mistakes that we make
Hmm.
that can be so tremendous. And
Yeah.
I'll close with my favorite mistake, and that is that Isaac Asimov, who wrote so many of the sci-fi books on
Hmm.
robots, was once quoted as saying, um, "Great discoveries in science are rarely heralded with the phrase Eureka, but instead, huh, that's funny." So,
Yeah.
the that's funny. I didn't expect that, or
Yeah.
those happy accidents tend to
Hmm.
be where life's good memories live.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's great, and I'm glad there wasn't a more traumatic um, end to the story. Clearly, you survived it. You're here to tell the story, but I'm glad it didn't involve being stuck on a mountain or hurting yourself in some way. I'm glad it was a happy accident, not a painful accident.
Well, and the thing about making those kinds of choices are it really depends on your skill level.
Hmm.
I'm an accomplished mountaineer and rock climber, and so I really didn't believe there was anything that the weather could throw at me that was going to be really sketchy. And the truth is that sometimes climbing down in nasty wet weather is much more dangerous than
Hmm.
climbing up. Um, and so so those are the kinds of factors that lead into the equation. But
Yeah.
summit fever is a real thing.
What do you mean by summit fever? Of like people
So
not wanting to turn back?
yeah, you've got the summit's right there. It's
Yeah.
right there, and I can reach out and touch it. And then they keep going, and what happens is you get the cascade of events.
Hmm.
And I think about the cascade of events and try and make decisions that don't end up with one bad decision leading to seven more bad decisions that lead to disaster.
Yeah.
So I believe I made an informed choice that worked out to my advantage,
Right.
but uh, but but again, happy accidents, happy
Yeah.
mistakes.
Did you go back and climb it? Did you have a chance to go climb it again when the view would have been better on a different day?
I've been to so many mountaintops that
Yeah.
that for me it was less about the view and more about from a personal history being at the starting or the ending point of the Appalachian Trail.
Hmm.
Years ago, one of my first jobs at SOAR was we hiked. We did a semester course with high school students that we did school and then and during the day we actually hiked portions of the Appalachian Trail.
Hmm.
And I think we hiked about 370 miles of the Appalachian Trail.
Wow.
And in that journey, I did all the Shenandoahs. I went up into Vermont and Pennsylvania, certainly this section in the Smokies. And then we finished there at Springer Mountain, which is, again, either the beginning or the start of the terminus of the Appalachian Trail. So I had seen the one, and getting a chance to see the other was kind of a capstone for me.
Hmm.
I'm uh, but as I've gotten older, the last time I was on the Appalachian Trail, I found a guy who had a knee brace, and I offered him $1,000 for the knee brace because the knees just don't tolerate that kind of
Hmm.
elevation gain and decline anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've only been up to the peak of two mountains in the Phoenix area when I used to live there, and I've gone back and visited. I've climbed Camelback Mountain, my 20s, 30s, 40s. I'm now 51, and I should go back and do it in my earlier 50s. It'll be easier than in the future, But yeah, I recognize like that feeling of reaching the top. And I don't know, have you climbed Camelback before?
I'm not, no.
Yeah. I mean, it's right in the city, and so it does really provide some unique views when you do get back up there. But yeah, I mean, there were times. I mean, I think where I had some doubt. I'm not a technical climber. I was in I think with appropriate rest in good enough shape to do it. But yeah, I recognize at least some of what you're saying, including like going down is a different kind of challenge than going up.
Yeah.
Are there any other like reflections or lessons learned when you talk about this pattern, and maybe we can kind of think through? I think what I heard you saying was maybe on some level wrong decision but good outcome.
Sure.
Are
So,
there times where like kind of if wrong decision quote unquote led to a bad outcome, would that kind of change the way you think through things, or is it just very situational?
I think that when you make a mistake, the podcast is your favorite mistake. And
Mm-hmm.
so often people's favorite mistakes aren't going to be ones that led to tragedy because they wouldn't make it a favorite.
Right.
But, I would say that one of my life philosophies, and also one of the philosophies we have here at SOAR, is the idea of failing forward,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so we take mistakes, we take failures, and examine what went right, what went wrong, and
Mm-hmm.
what we can, how we can improve. One of
Yeah.
the things I'll do with a group is I'll put forward an initiative, and so then they'll the nature of our kids is rather than sort of work through a plan, they just jump in and they try and do something, and inevitably they're going to fail. And so one of the questions I'll ask is, what did we do right?
Mm-hmm.
What
That's.
did we do
Mm-hmm.
wrong? How can we maximize the things that we did right, and how can we overcome and remove the obstacles of the
Mm-hmm.
things that didn't go well, and then create a new plan. And so for our
Mm-hmm.
kids, at least kids with learning disabilities and ADHD who can be particularly impulsive,
Mm-hmm.
learning how to both jump in with both feet, and then also figure out how to take that information and then apply it towards a plan. I think
Mm-hmm.
about that kid, that experiential learner who, you come home and they've taken the toaster apart, and they did a great job taking it apart, but they weren't sure how to put it all back together. And
Right.
so what have I learned about that? Well, I take pictures now along the way when I start taking things apart, so that
Yeah.
um, so that when I put them back together, they look like the picture. And
Mm-hmm.
then I have a little baggie that I keep of extra screws and parts that didn't go back in, that if I ever need them, you know.
Right.
And so that's the nature of strategies.
Mm-hmm.
How can you overcome routine obstacles that allow you to make a mistake and then learn and grow from it? And then the other thing that we teach here is, um, you know, you only grow by your willingness to kind of put yourself out there and kind of push
Mm-hmm.
the envelope.
Sure.
Um, and uh, but it's only effective to push that envelope if you've got a quality support network that can do that. Just yesterday, I did something that pushed my envelope. Um, yeah, some days I ride with a motorcycle group,
Mm-hmm.
and we ride twisties here in the mountains. And the weather forecast was supposed to be a good day, but a concern is that the leaves are down, and leaves and motorcycles don't mix real well, and we found ourselves with drizzle.
Hmm.
And so now the roads are wet. We're riding twisties in the mountains, and there are leaves on the ground. And very early in the ride, my back tire kind of fishtailed out from underneath me. I managed to keep it
Mm.
under control, but now I'm on the edge of my comfort level. Uh, what the thing that I had that allowed that to be a more successful experience was, there was a group of us with really experienced riders, and you had front and sweep people, and so had something happened, we could have taken care of each other.
Right.
At one of the stops, I mentioned to the person behind me, "Hey, listen, I'm having trouble keeping up with the person in front of me because this is really a stressful ride for me." And And he looked at me and he said something that just absolutely everybody should say to anyone who's kind of in that stress moment. And he said, ride at your pace.
Yeah.
Don't try and keep up. The person in front of you has a responsibility to slow down to make sure that they're still watching you. Ride at your pace.
Mm.
And so it ended up being a very safe ride, a beautiful day on the mountain. The leaves, were pushed to the side, and finally the sun came out.
Mm.
But about at the midpoint of the ride, I decided that I just really wasn't comfortable,
Mm-hmm.
being the one that was slowing the group down and trying to stay up with somebody. So I peeled off and finished my own experience at my pace, and had a much so the whole day was a lovely day. But I definitely sometimes, if you're going to be stretched and pushed to
Mm-hmm.
your edge, growth happens there, but you really need a good, healthy, quality support network in
Yeah.
order to have those mistakes become favorite mistakes.
Yeah. And I'm guessing what you're describing there are probably parallels to the SOAR program and the summer camps of helping kids get out of their own comfort zone, but having a good support network and structure there for them.
Yeah, a rock climb is a great example of that, right? They're on rope, they're being encouraged. They get to a point where they're like, I can't do this anymore, and I'll say to them, hey, take a breath. You're in control. If you want to come down, you'll come down. But if you think you can go maybe just one more handhold up, then give yourself the chance to do that, because there's a support network here. And very often they will do one more handhold all the way to the top. And then we'll talk about, when they get down, who is that support network for you that allows you to both success and fail.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk more about the SOAR program, and like what are some ways where, let's say, the summer camp program is adapted or enhanced for kids with ADHD or learning disabilities?
So there are just a couple of things that make us particularly unique.
Mm-hmm.
The first is that we are really focused on what's right about these kids, focusing on their strengths and their abilities.
Mm-hmm.
The second is that we're also really focused on helping make sure that they have successful outcomes. And so we're going to challenge you, but not to the point that we believe you're going to have a failed experience that you have to overcome, but instead you're going to push that edge and have had success, because success fosters more success.
Mm-hmm.
The third thing that we do is we create an environment where kids are allowed to be themselves, and we've got a low staff to student ratio that allows adults to kind of intervene when things might go socially awry,
Mm-hmm.
to the point where we can navigate back to the path of how kids should interact with each other, and then have these private conversations about what could have been done differently, how could that interaction have been more successful,
Mm-hmm.
and ask kids to sort of climb personal accountability ladders as they are working towards figuring out what works for them and what doesn't work for them. And then finally, the other thing that really kind of makes SOAR unique is that we're utilizing this environment, which many of our kids are specifically suited to, right? Because they're the kids who notice everything. They're often the kids who love being outdoors. And so now you're putting them in an environment that is particularly suited to their strengths and abilities. You're focusing on those strengths and abilities, and you're giving them the necessary structure and support to thrive.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and then the structure is the other one. Our programs are incredibly structured in a way that allows for supportive transitions and support of the way that our kids deal with day-to-day tasks that allow them to thrive.
Yeah. How much of that environment, I'm just thinking through, if a child's choosing to go to SOAR, the parents are choosing to send their child to SOAR, or I hear what you're saying about creating an environment and experiences that'll be well suited for them. How much of the benefit comes from being at a camp that has kids with similar strengths, similar challenges, similar situations.
So I think it's remarkable, right?
Yeah.
Because not only are you seeing other kids who are like you, um, but you're also dealing with adults who understand you
Mm-hmm.
and are creating an environment that will allow you to thrive. You know, uh, upwards of 20% of the school age population is dealing with some type of learning disability, autism spectrum disorder, ADHD. And so these kids are interacting with each other, and sometimes it seems like there's more of them in a classroom than the 20% you would expect.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but but what is remarkable is what happens with those kids when they're in environments in which their needs are being met, and they've got leaders who can provide the structure necessary for them to thrive. And
Mm-hmm.
that's and so that can be really special.
Yeah.
If when you've got a teacher who has 32 kids, and then you've got the Y kid that is taking up an inordinate amount of their time, they
Yeah.
get frustrated. And it becomes a challenge for everybody.
Yeah.
But when you're in a group of all Y kids, and
Mm-hmm.
then you've got the structure in place and instructors who are happy to answer your questions, it's a game changer.
Yeah. So yeah, that I'm sure that sense of feeling accepted and having people who are maybe less likely to get frustrated with those questions or other characteristics of kids with ADHD. I could see where that would be a huge
Sure.
benefit.
And
Yeah.
do you want to know where the really biggest benefit is? The sort of
Mm-hmm.
the hidden gem of it all is that often these kids struggle to make friends.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they're the kid who doesn't get invited to the birthday party,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then they come to SOAR, and because of the relationships that we're able to establish and the counselor's ability to kind of help mitigate and manage some of those situations, they
Mm-hmm.
walk out of here with 3 new friends.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and and
That's
for some
great.
parents, a friendship is everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's great. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of your other, knowledge or experiences in helping people, in particular with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. When I was a kid, we heard more about ADD, attention deficit disorder. First off, is it fair to say that just some of that language has evolved a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, shoot, when I was diagnosed, it was attention deficiency syndrome when I was a kid.
Oh,
And
okay.
then before that, it was minimal
Deficiency.
brain dysfunction. And
Oh,
so it's really gone through, a
yeah.
couple different incantations. And when you remember it being ADD, it was actually ADD with hyperactivity, ADD
Mm-hmm.
without hyperactivity.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, it's the same. It's the same challenge and the same disorder. And you now have ADHD, and then two types, and one
Right.
is the more hyperactive, and one is the less hyperactive, more perseverative nature.
Yeah. So John, when did you get diagnosed with ADHD, as a child or as an
Yeah.
adult?
As I think I was in the fifth or sixth grade.
Uh-huh. Okay. And so I guess that would explain, at least in large part, then your affinity for the SOAR program and the people you're helping.
And also the things I like to do in my spare time, right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
talked about riding motorcycles in the mountains. That my
Mm-hmm.
go-to is I'm a whitewater canoeist, and I'm paddling class 3-4 whitewater. Much to the great dismay of my mom growing up, all the things that I was really attracted to required the
Mm-hmm.
use of a helmet.
Yeah. Um, so there's that combination of all of your interests, and I mean, how many, when you talk about people who are best suited to work um, at the SOAR program, do you have a sense of how many of the staff members are ADHD versus having
Yeah.
training to work with people with
So
ADHD?
so I think that we do get a fair amount of staff that are either diagnosed or self-diagnosed once they're here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what we have found is that it helps if you've got an understanding, but that's not required. What the ideal staff that we've discovered is somebody that is tenacious, somebody that can be patient, somebody who can keep things kind of fun and not take things too seriously, and then somebody that is malleable, willing to learn, and and willing to kind of try the systems that we've developed over the years and see how just successful they can be.
Mm-hmm.
So when if they've got grit and they've got a sense of humor and they're kind, they're going to do well at SOAR.
Yeah. One other thing I wanted to ask, about ADHD. I think maybe this language will continue to evolve, but my understanding of this, and part of my personal journey through this was getting a diagnosis 2.5 years ago after I think kind of being in what I thought was denial of a self-diagnosis, and then reaching out and talking to a counselor, getting a diagnosis, and then about 1.5 years later, getting a conflicting diagnosis that no, maybe the executive function symptoms and things that were troubling me, could be more anxiety based than, it's a different, maybe different root cause. But as I learned more about this and have tried to learn more about myself, like there are certainly things that seem familiar where, I think I would struggle with attention. I would have a lot of anxiety about that, thinking I should be better at paying attention. But then at the same time, like it was really more a matter of misdirected attention and even hyper focus, where it seems like there's this mixed bag where it's not even attention deficit, but the struggle between like what I want to be doing versus what I should be paying attention or should be doing. I'm curious I know I threw a lot at you there, but curious your reactions or reflections to some of that. Not asking you to diagnose or confirm anything, but just more broadly, as people struggle with, do I have ADHD or not?
Yeah, I think. Well, here's my honest opinion.
Mm-hmm.
The diagnosis only matters if it gets you support that you need.
Mm-hmm.
And so if the support you need is medication, then the diagnosis is important.
Mm-hmm.
What is more important than the diagnosis is the compensatory strategies that you're developing to overcome the particular challenges.
Mm-hmm.
Now, anxiety in this country is at an all-time high. And COVID did us no favors in that capacity, right, especially with kids, right? Mm-hmm. And so whether or not your ADHD is a product of anxiety, or if anxiety just exacerbates symptoms that may manifest as ADHD, it doesn't really matter unless you're developing the coping mechanisms to handle the anxiety. Mm-hmm. And so from my perspective, again, for parents, a diagnosis, if it gets you services, if it gets you an IEP, if it gets you accommodations, then the diagnosis is important. And helping understand. And there are, and let's be really clear. Most of the strategies that we employ here, we call them life success attributes. Most of the things that we do here are going to work well for anybody. They're just particularly critical for this population. Mm-hmm. And so, so from a diagnosis standpoint, whether it's executive function, and the good news about executive function is that, the brain is a muscle, right, to some degree. And the more you exercise it and the more practice you give it and the strategies that you employ, then the better off you're going to be. There's a disproportionate number of CEOs and executive directors in this country who are dealing with either dyslexia or some type of executive function or ADHD because we are out of the box thinkers. And when we have the additional support of, let's say, a secretary, it becomes our executive function, really it leaves us the opportunity to become dreamers and big thinkers and movers and shakers in the world.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's all I have to say about that.
Sure. Yeah, but it comes back to something you brought up earlier, strengths and challenges that come from being your unique self, whether there's a difference in how your brain is wired or whether there's anxiety caused by different factors. But yeah, to your point, I'm not shy to talk about, to your point. Yes, I have the ability to get support resources and kind of, figuring out, my own journey of trying to be a better version of myself, not changing who I am, but like you said, learning to adapt or cope, or, I think one thing, psychologists I've spent a lot of time talking to is to cut myself some slack of realizing, like, she went through just the other thing I'll share about, diagnostic things, because there's no brain scan, of course, there's no blood test really that they could do. But, we did some, objective tests of verbal, audio, attention. And she's like, objectively, your attention is actually really good. What's off the charts is the pressure you put on yourself when you think you're falling short of, I think maybe what was an unrealistic standard of, like, looking around the room of, like, well, how many other people are, their minds are wandering? That's called being human.
Well, and I will also say that one of the other things that factor into that is levels of conscientiousness,
Mm-hmm.
right? Some folks are just super conscientious about everything they do, and that's both a gift and a curse, right? The gift
Sure.
of it is that you get things done at a quality level, and you care enough about it to really invest your full being into that. The curse is that because you've invested your full being, there's a cost to that in other parts of your life. And
Mm-hmm.
so people who are really, really hyper conscientious tend to struggle with that component more than folks are like, I'm just going to give this my best effort and I cross it off the list.
Yeah.
And we assume that one is better than the other, but the truth is that that I'm a fan of saying never let the great become the enemy of the good,
Mm-hmm.
and that comparison is the enemy of joy.
Mm. So that's a phrase I haven't heard as much. I want to kind of let that sink in a little bit. Say that again. Comparison.
Comparison is the enemy of joy.
Yeah.
Comparing my product or my attention or
Mm.
what I have
Mm-hmm.
against how somebody else may have done. If I find myself coming up short, it steals my joy. It takes away my stoke. And
Yeah.
you don't want to steal yours or anybody else's stoke.
Yeah. Well, our guest again today, John Willson, the executive director of SOAR, summer camps, boarding school, other programs. I'll make sure there's links to the website in the show notes for people who want to learn more. Maybe as a final topic, John, I know you have some guidance around key steps for somebody of what to do next after a diagnosis. If you could sort of give us a couple of tips and good ideas for people.
Sure. So whether it's a child or an adult, you've just received a diagnosis of ADHD, or you suspect there might be ADHD. There's a couple really quality organizations out there who solely exist to provide you with information. I'm on the board of a national organization called CHADD, chad.org, CHADD.org, and that's one of the first stops I would make, and collect as much information there as I possibly could. And then the next step I'm going to look for is, okay, what accommodations do I need? Because the language that I teach young adults to try and understand is, these are my strengths, these are my challenges, these are the things I need to be successful. And so when you answer those questions for yourself or for your child, these are his strengths, these are her challenges, these are the things that me or my kids need to be successful. It now narrows the path about how you can try and get there. And then I'm also a huge fan of the coaching industry,
Mm-hmm.
I think ADHD coaches for the right people can be remarkable, and that's less about getting at root causes of why you do something, and more
Mm-hmm.
about how you create strategies that allow you to move towards the goals and objectives that you've established for yourself.
Yeah.
And then I also don't discount therapy. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes there's some old baggage there that some
Mm-hmm.
quality healing could be done to help set you up for success. Step one, go to chad.org.
Mm-hmm.
Step two, look at a real thoughtful self examination of strengths, challenges, what do you need to be successful? And then the third is, keep doing lots of research on the internet and find things that you like.
Mm-hmm.
Find things that fit with who you are and what work within your philosophy of self discovery and parenting.
Yeah. Well, that's all really good advice. And then, one other thing I read in, notes about SOAR is this idea of support system for adults in the workplace. I think even younger generations are much more open. I think in terms of talking about, and I love how you framed it, strengths and challenges instead of strengths and weaknesses. But I think younger people I'm working with, within a software company, meaning like in their 20s and 30s, are much more open and talking about neurodiversity. We've had conversations in a company that I work with of discovering a support network
You know,
of people saying, here are some, things that I deal with, and being aware, not for sympathy or anything, but just so everyone can support each other. Or when people connect and say, yeah, that sounds like me too, that really fosters some helpful connections.
years ago, uh, this wonderful community had a support network for ADHD parents and individuals, adults in every community. Um, the internet changed that, and now people get the information they need. They don't necessarily, have these support groups anymore,
Mm,
but but they still somewhat exist. And I think that you really happen upon one of the most important things that any parent or any person can do, and that's really identify what your support network really looks like.
mm,
And who is in that support network, and where are there broken chains in that support network. but
mm,
but ultimately, and this is 100%, the most um, the most important ingredient in moving our successful theme of adults that are living with a learning disability or ADHD and being successful in life. The thing that they all have in common is they have really healthy support networks.
mm-hmm. And I hope people are able to find that. If the listener is questioning, should I get help? Should I? I mean, I guess if someone's questioning, should I get help? The answer probably is yes. Talk to a counselor. Talk to somebody, or go chad.org. Talk to somebody. There's no reason to kind of just continue with that self doubt or wonder. Talk to, instead of wondering, I guess if in doubt, talk to somebody.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I don't know when this is going to air, but because it was filmed on Halloween,
Yes.
I've got my little Shrek outfit here, and don't be the ogre alone in the in your little hole in the forest. He thrived once he found a support network.
Yeah. I could have, well, that would have been fun. I could have, if we had planned in advance, considering it's October 31st, I could have worn a hat or a costume or a wig or something too. But thanks for throwing that on
You're welcome.
for at least a minute. And being the last day of October, I don't have the exact language right in front of me, but October was
It
ADHD
was Awareness Month.
Awareness Month, ADHD Awareness Month. So thank you for everything you're doing to help people, to bring awareness, and to help people in different ways. So John Willson, Executive Director of SOAR, their website, there'll be links in the show notes. John's in North Carolina, so it's soarnc.org, but I'm sure you have people coming in from all
All over
over.
the world.
Yeah. Well, John, thank you so much for being a guest here, for sharing your stories and perspectives today.
All right. My pleasure, Mark. Thanks.
Sure thing.